Hi, and welcome to another episode in the Ionic Viper series called nanoCHATs, where we practice one of our critically reflective teaching practices where we share our experiences and stories with our peers. I'd like to start by having everybody introduce themselves. I'm Barb Reisner. I'm a professor at James Madison University, which is a public, primarily undergraduate institution in Virginia, and we have 20,000 plus undergrads.
Hi, I'm Meghan Porter. I am at Indiana University Bloomington main campus. It's a 4-year R1 institution, undergrads and grad programs. And we have approximately 40,000 undergraduates in our program.
I'm Kari Young, and I teach at Center College in Danville, Kentucky, which is a small liberal arts college of about 1,400 students, and located in a small town in rural Kentucky.
And my name is Adam Johnson. I teach at Harvey Mudd College, which is an even smaller liberal arts college. We have a total of about 800 students, but we are part of the Claremont Colleges Consortium, so we have a slightly larger collection of institutions than just one college in a cornfield, and we are in the greater LA area.
Excellent. I'm Lori Watson, and I'm a professor of chemistry at Earlham College, which is a small liberal arts college of about 1,000 in rural Indiana. So we've got a little more rural. I'd like to start off asking you all some questions. And the first is to tell us a little bit about why and how you've used specifications grading in your classes.
So I'll go first. I switched to specifications grading as part of my pandemic response. I knew that going into our fall semester, I was going to need to make use of all of the time that I had for working on my classes, because I was also caregiving for my family. And I wanted a system that would help me save time grading, and also would help my students have a really clear idea of how they were doing, because I knew that they would be facing their own personal challenges. And also my college had switched to a sort of unfamiliar 6-week block format where students took 2 courses in a sort of an accelerated environment. So with those sort of design constraints, I wanted something that would be simple. So my system had 3 components. The main one are exams. So in 6 weeks, I did 6 exams, 1 per week. And instead of grading, making an exam out of 100 points and then grading it on some sort of partial credit percentage correct, I switched to grading my questions only correct or incorrect, credit or no credit. But I changed the way that I organized the questions. I categorized them as either copper, silver, or gold questions, because I'm an inorganic chemist, based on the cognitive level of the question. So copper questions were usually knowledge or understanding, maybe some low-level application. Silver questions required application and analysis, and then the gold questions were usually evaluation or create, so something like write a mechanism. And the copper questions were often multiple choice and therefore auto-graded. The gold questions often came from the literature, so lots of great Viper LOs there. And so then that way I could easily pick out, is this question correct or incorrect, without trying to figure out how correct. And then to earn a certain grade, my students had to answer a certain number of copper questions for a C, a certain number of copper and silver for a B, and a certain number of copper, silver, and gold to get the elusive A. I also graded my lab papers on a credit, no credit basis based on a list of specifications. And then I also gave a final exam that was either the ACS exam for in-person students or an equivalent exam. And I had kind of a threshold for A, B, and C level there. And so overall, I was really pleased with how that worked. I think that one thing that I want to work on is coming up with those lab specifications. I think it was really easy for me to give students the benefit of the doubt when I really needed to hold the line. And the same is kind of true for the exam questions as well, that I gave them a couple of extra opportunities compared to what I had sort of originally planned, because I wanted to make sure that they did well. And I think in the future, I'll have a better sense of what the thresholds are, what the levels are, and I won't feel the need to do that as much.
I'll go second. My plan seems much less organized than yours, Kari. So for those of you who are scared by the level of organization that having gold, silver, and bronze, I think I sort of have the bottom end. I got the idea last summer watching the Slither that Santiago Toledo did for Viper. There was someone else there too, but I forget who it was. And that was really inspired me to think about how I can change my grading. When I watched that, we were aiming for an in-person fall. And then the week before school started, we switched to online only because our county shut us down. And so we were online all year. And for sort of similar reasons, I wanted to give the students a better picture of where they were in the class with this crazy online format. I only did specifications grading for my lecture course, not for my lab course. And so I did clearly identifiable skills, which is something I've been meaning to do on my syllabus for years. Just to like, today's goal is, character tables, and today's goal is the spectrochemical series. And so I just divided my questions into those very specific goals. And I have a 3-2-1 grading system. So 3 is mastery, and that was an A. 2 was proficiency, which was B, and 1 was novice. And the way I did it is I kept the same sort of assignment schedule that I had in a normal year. So I had, weekly homeworks. Normally I would do a lot of in-class work, and we were fully remote, and I tried using a Jamboard and I tried different things, and it just didn't work for grading. So I did it for practice, but I didn't grade them on that. And I decided that you could only get a 2 or a 1 on a homework, because it was open book, open friend. And then if you wanted to get the A, you needed to demonstrate that on an exam. And so that's sort of how I did it. I was pretty harsh on the grading for the homeworks. It was, you either got a 2 or a 1, and maybe like a 1.5. But on the exams, I found myself doing what you did, Kari, wanting to give some partial credit and like, oh, that's minus 1.1 point. And so as a result, my grades were high. Higher than normal, but not a lot higher than normal. So I feel like it was a lot easier. I had students who didn't take the final because they had the grade they wanted, and it wasn't always an A. Some students were like, "Yeah, I'm good with what I have, and I don't have to take the final," because it couldn't lower your grade; it could only raise your grade. So yeah, if I've got a B+ and I'm happy with that, I'm not going to take exam 3. I'm not going to take the final. I'm done. So in that regard, it was a lot more easier for them, and they always sort of knew where they were. So that's why I liked it.
So I'm actually a little bit curious. So it sounds like you had these specifications gradings for the particular assignments. I guess I'm still a little fuzzy on how that translates into the course grade as someone who's never done this before.
So I opened my grade book so I could take a look at it, because I thought that this question might come up. What I did is I just said, you either got a 3.2 or a 1 or a 2.75. And then at the end, I averaged it, and your average across all those. So if your average score was a 2.8, that was an A-, right? So that's how I did it. I'm not sure I would do that again. There was a recent CNE News article that talked about sort of 2 different levels, kind of like what you were, like the bronze, silver, gold. So to get a C, you needed to, demonstrate mastery of certain topics, and that you could pass the course. And then to raise your grade, there would be sort of the advanced topics. So I didn't do that, but that's sort of how I did my grade book.
Kari, how did you approach that?
Yeah, so my bundles were related to just the sheer number of questions you answered correctly. So in my case, it happened to be that you needed 24 correctly answered copper questions to get a C. And you needed one of your 3 possible lab reports had to meet specifications. And you needed to get, it was something like 30th percentile on the ACS exam. So we, had these sort of really specific things. You either did those things or you didn't. And then to get a B, you did all those things, plus you answered 18 silver questions, and you got 2 of your 3 lab reports met specifications, and you had to get a 50th percentile on the ACS exam. And then to get an A, you did all those things. And then you also answered 10 gold questions correctly. And you did all 3 of your lab papers met specifications. And you got an 80th percentile on the ACS exam. And so my system was really weighted toward the exams. So the exams kind of like anchored your grade. And then I allowed pluses and minuses based on whether or not you met the other things. So if you had enough questions to get an A, but you didn't do all 3 of your lab reports, then you got an A minus. And so, one wouldn't have to do that. You could make that a B if somebody didn't meet all the specifications. But in my system, it kind of worked to use the lab and the final exam to do plus and minus.
Thank you.
All right, so I did mine just in my lab course, and I will admit my initial motivation was slightly selfish. My lab course is about 100 students, 100 to 120, and they are divided into lab sections of 20, and we have teaching assistants that teach each of those labs and do our grading. So I get that I'm spoiled on that end, but it also meant I have 5 or 6 different people grading. And for years, that has been an issue with, oh, my TA grades more harshly, or, oh, this results in discussion was worth 15, but I got a 13 and not a 14. Can you tell me like where that point came from? And I just really got annoyed with it, to be honest. And so I decided that I had wanted to switch to spec grading. And at the same time, I was developing a new lab course. My course used to be a 5-credit lecture lab combined. I got it split, and it happened to coincide with COVID. So I figured, why not? This was a good time to do it. And the way I do it is I have grade bundles. So I say for a C, these are the assignments you have to complete at a satisfactory level. And then kind of what Adam mentioned, those are my essentials. And then to get a B, they had to do the same lab assignments from the C bundle, but they also had to do 2 peer reviews of the full journal article. I have them right. And for an A, they had to do everything from the B bundle. And then they added on not only doing a final journal article, but they also then took the information in that article and created a PowerPoint talk that they did for it. So each bundle had kind of a little bit extra that they needed to do. And I really took it from starting at a C, like what is the kind of bare minimum that I would expect from students to say I'm comfortable passing you in this class. And then because everything was graded on a satisfactory or not, I also had a token system. I originally started it for COVID, and I'm going to keep it afterwards. COVID, I was starting it with the idea that everyone had a lot of other things going on. I mean, I was late on things because just like Kari, I have 2 young kids that I was trying to deal with. And what tokens allowed, every student started with 2. They could earn up to an additional 2 by doing a small assignment. This semester, it was finding a minority chemist and writing a little blurb about them. They could earn up to 2 more. And they were theirs to use. So they could take it for a 72-hour extension on an assignment. If they got an unsatisfactory, they could use a token to revise the assignment and turn it back in to kind of lower that stress of, oh, I got an unsatisfactory, I'm done. Like the A is not in reach now. And so students really, at first, they were hesitant. Like I would get these long explanation emails about why they needed to use a token. And I was like, I don't care. Just tell me you're using a token. Like you're an adult. Decide to use it. And that worked well after we gave them some guidance, because at first students were like, oh, I just procrastinated starting, so now I need the 72-hour extension. And then later in the semester, something kind of more valid or more important would happen, and we'd be like, you had up to 4 tokens. So the grade bundles were pretty like set. Like Kari, if they missed a bundle by 1 thing, I would usually give them the minus of the bundle that they had almost completed. For pluses, it was based on how many tokens they had left over, because it really showed that you did more assignments at that higher level the first time. And so if you had 2 left over, you could get a C plus or a B plus. If you had 3, you could get an A plus. And that worked out really well. I also gave them an Excel sheet. And so this is one of the changes I would make. At the very beginning of the semester, I created a Excel sheet that had all the bundles organized, what they needed for every bundle. And they could my idea was they would just check it off as they received assessments back. So they would always know exactly where they stood. Figured out very quickly most students were not using it, because I had students freaking out that like they weren't going to get the grade they wanted, and I'm looking at their bundles going, you're fine. So I did an extra token assignment where they could earn an extra one, just filling it out and sending it in. And I think in the future, I would make that a required twice a semester where they fill out their own Excel sheet. So it kind of forces them to do that. The other change I made, my assessments, I decided to have fun with communication this year. So they did research briefs, infographics, talks, really any communication I could think of, because most of my students aren't going to chemistry grad school. Only about 10% of my class. The rest are some sort of pre-health professional program. And so they don't care about writing lab reports. So I decided to do other things, including a journal article. And so each of those was assessed on a science satisfactory and unsatisfactory, and then the communication satisfactory and unsatisfactory. So if they really understood the science, but they like couldn't do an infographic to save their life, it wasn't a complete all or nothing on the assignment. And so that worked out pretty well. The only change I would make for that is for my TA's sake. They struggle with deciding the final satisfactory or unsatisfactory based on, even with a really detailed rubric. So what I'm going to change for next semester is put numbers on the rubric, just like a 2 and a 1, or however I want to do it. And they can literally just add it up at the end and say, if you get this, it's a satisfactory. If you're below that, it's an unsatisfactory. And I think that will help my TAs feel a little bit more comfortable with that distinction. But it definitely helped like a more consistent grading across 5 or 6 TAs.
I love that. I think my hardest part was wanting to give partial credit on a system that I had created that really didn't need it. And then I was like, oh, that's 2.9 out of 3. Good job. Like, it really wasn't necessary. But yeah.
Yeah, that was exactly my question. How do you kind of sell it to students, right? Because in most of the classes they've had, partial credit is a thing, and they're used to arguing over, oh, I want that extra point. So is there a way to talk about this with the students to kind of help them understand that this is really helping them not only learn, but also, get the grade that they want?
I mean, I didn't do partial credit on the homeworks. It was either 0, 1, or 2. And then on the exams, I was like, this, I don't want to give a full 3 on this one. So it was usually like, knocking it down a little bit because I was worried that I was going to have all A's. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I don't care if I have all A's, but I wanted to be able to have some sort of way to differentiate the students. So I felt for me to evaluate a ranking of students, having partial credit on the exams was important. So I always write a really, really detailed key. So I didn't feel too bad on the homeworks. Like, oh, this is only a 2, check the key. And then they could see what they did. And I didn't have I had like 1 or 2 regrade requests, whereas normally I'd have, 10 times more than that. And because they bought into it. I didn't really sell it hard. I told them why I was doing it. I kept reminding them why I was doing it. After a while, they sort of, and by the end of the semester, they were like very thankful. Like, oh, I always really felt like I knew where I was. Especially, and this was one of my biggest challenges, is once I told them to just completely ignore our LMS, because it was giving them a grade that was meaningless relative to what their actual grade in the class was. So I gave them, I told them to average their points and divide it, and that would give them a sense of where they were.
Yeah, Adam, I had a pretty similar experience where I explained this to my students. I told them why we were doing this, and they were skeptical. They were nervous about the no partial credit, and they started to kind of lawyer it, right? Like, but so what if I'm all correct except for? And I basically said, you're going to have to trust me, right? And so we went with that. But for me, after that first exam, when they saw how many of each of the different kinds of questions they had answered correctly, and therefore they knew like how far they were on their progress, they really came, like they were in, because the numbers were small enough and you didn't have to try to do the weighted average thing, so that they had this really discrete understanding of how far they were and how many more chances they had to get there. And so about midterm, we were sort of chatting one day, and they said, by the way, we were not with you on this at the beginning, but I want you to know that we're actually really pleased now. We thought you'd kind of lost your mind, but but we're reformed. And it was exactly that. And so at midterm, kind of like Megan talked about, at midterm, I sent them all a little note and said, because I only had 14. I sent them a little note that said, okay, this is how many I think you have. Make sure that that's correct with your records. And most of them could respond immediately. Oh, yes, that's what I have. Because they just had it. They were good accountants. They had it in their head all the time.
Yeah, I sold mine to the students as like an independent thing. From the start of the semester, you knew exactly what was required. There was no question about kind of, expectations or, it was, you want an A, this is what you need to do. You know it from day one. I sold the tokens as like your adults. If you have a really bad week, then, you have 3 exams in other classes, then cool, take the week, take the 72-hour extension. You don't need to give me any justification on it. And my students really like that. They had also, because all of our labs are really big, they had all taken lab courses before and complained about, TA grading. So I didn't really have to sell that one very hard. But I did find I had to have really detailed rubrics for everything. And when my TAs graded, I put the rubrics, as most of us did, right? But now on my LMS. So the rubrics are integrated into Canvas, and my AIs can click the rubric on Canvas and enter comments on that section right there. That was a big difference that I did from the fall and spring, was I created much more detailed rubrics, and that helped students because they had them ahead of time. So essentially I was like, use the rubric as a checklist. You want to know what we're looking for? This is what we're looking for. And they really liked that because they felt like they knew the expectations. There weren't any surprises going through it, and they felt more comfortable with that. But I'll agree with Kari. They were definitely skeptical at first because I was the only person in the chem department at the time. I've created a few converts now, but who had used it. So that was the initial week or two was a little, trust me, we can do this. And after that, it was fine.
Yeah, I know one of my colleagues in the math department does something similar to this, although his is way enormously too complicated for me. Like I heard about it and I'm like, nope, I'm not doing that. So some of my students had seen this before.
I have a very practical question. As someone who hasn't done this, what tips do you have for someone who is just getting started with this idea? What would you suggest?
Well, here's what I have very watched the Slither from last summer that Santiago did, because that really has a lot of good advice. Read the CNE News article that came out last month, which we will link in the YouTube right down here. Because just jump in. I mean, it's not actually that difficult. It was a little more bureaucracy on the grading end, because all the grading rubrics are designed, this is some points out of 100 and it goes into your grade. And it's different when you do this. So, think carefully about how, I like the bundles. Think carefully about how you would organize your bundles and then just do it, because I think it's not as difficult as you think it's going to be.
Yeah, and so I would agree. The place that I started was in thinking about what was the most important thing. And for me, I've been categorizing my questions according to Bloom's taxonomy for a long time. So for me, I took something that I was already working on and I added that into the grading system. So it wasn't this huge revolution. It was, we're just going to change how we score things. I was using the same questions. I was just describing them differently. And for me, it was that what qualifies as excellence in my course is related to this cognitive complexity. And so for me, that really fit with my course. The other thing that I would say is that I give you permission not to do this the way that somebody else has done this. There's no right system. And so thinking about what's most important to you and focus on those things, and that will be specific to your class, because you know your students and you know where they've come in, and you know what they're like, and you know what you're trying to get, where you're trying to get them. And so in the Ionic Viper way, our diversity is a feature and not a bug. So do it the way that works for you.
Yeah, I would add in, be rational about the planning time you have. right? If you are starting now and you have until mid-August, that's a little different than maybe in between semesters, right? If you're trying to do it. And so if you don't have an awesome already system in place, like Kari did with her categorizing questions, you don't have to go to the extreme of the full course. If that's something, that is really uncomfortable, you could start with homework assignments and say you need, 8 of 10 satisfactory homework assignments to get the full points on homework, or things like that, where you can start small if it's really nerve-wracking about going, I'm going to do this entire course. I know right now I would be terrified of doing my lecture course to try and deal with exams. That would be the last thing I would want to deal with. But you can add it in small ways, and even that can make a huge difference on an instructor's end for kind of, but also student comfort. Okay, I don't have to ace every homework, or I don't have to do every single thing, but there's still that encouragement to do well on it. So, that would be a tip too, is think about the time you have or the structure you already have in place, but when you get started.
And let me add, because you just said exams, one of the articles, I think it was the CNE News article, recommended not doing large scale exams. And I think that's the biggest breakdown of my scheme this spring is, I tried to just keep the same, assignments. And what would have worked a lot better is do a quiz every other class, and because those 2 skills, there you go. And then you don't have to do a big exam. You're just sort of frequent low stakes testing, which I do anyway, but that really changes. I don't need to then come back and put it on an exam to get points, right? They've demonstrated their skill. And if I do 2 or 3 skills every class period, my exam too ended up being way too long because I felt like I had to test all of the skills, and then it was way too long. So think about, how you can change the way you evaluate student learning.
Great. Well, I want to thank all of you again for sharing. It's so helpful to learn from others and to really have this community and talk about our teaching in both formal and informal ways. I want to encourage all of you to look at the other nanoCHATs that we have here on our YouTube channel, or go to the Viper website and look for the nanoCHAT collections, and you'll see lots of other mini conversations about different teaching techniques and reflective practice. I'd also like to end by encouraging everyone to share comments both on the Viper website and on our YouTube channel. And if you'd like to reflect on teaching or learn more, considering asking the fellows to share their experiences through another nanoCHAT.